All right, so as we move on to the 10th section of this video series, we're going to be talking about GPUs a little bit here and kind of make an advisement on what to get, what to do, those kind of things. And before we jump into that, I want to start off by reiterating kind of the point of this series because I'm sure it's going to come to pass that people are going to see these and be maybe confused or lost as to who I'm addressing. Um, and I didn't want to do these in each and every video because I thought it'd just get like too repetitive to be like, so we're doing this for, and maybe I should have, I don't know. But anyway, this is for a person who has not built a gaming rig, who has not bought a gaming PC, and is kind of looking for what to do to get just a machine to get them into PC gaming. So this is not a guide for how to build a monster rig or how to build a, machine that's going to be, just this gargantuan thing right away, right? It's going to be to spell out how to get yourself basically into gaming. Now, I've made the claim numerous times that I build machines that last 10 to 15 years, and this should be able to fit that no matter what you do. And really, a lot of machines kind of fit that case if they're built right. As long as they have the compatibility for additional parts and such, you should be able to get a lot of mileage out of a machine. Um, that being said, this video is probably going to be the one that will get the most negative feedback because a lot of people have a lot of preconceived notions about what you need for a GPU, what you have to get, and those kind of things. And I'm going to preface this entire video by saying that this is going to explain what you're going to be able to get away with at a minimum and what you should probably go to in the future, because as of the filming these videos, which is this is the end of May 2026 when I'm filming this, video card prices are still all over the place. They're still a mess, so some things that I'm going to talk about will be pieces of advice that will work in a better economy when things level back out. Because right now, if I tell you, here's some ways you could save money on GPUs, right now it's not going to make a lot of sense, but it is still valid information to have, and that's why I'm going to include it here. So basically, this is a video for beginners wanting to build a machine that really don't know much about the PC itself, but want to play games. And I think it's still important and still very valid. So that's where we're at. So that's kind of the intro to this video. We're going to move on to more points, like topics that come up, stuff like that, and then kind of where you should be out looking for a GPU. I'm not going to necessarily be describing specific brands because I don't have an alliance with one brand over the other. More so it's specs and a very limited amount of that, because I don't think anybody that's new to building, especially if you're watching this, you're like, what should I get? I don't want to overburden you with getting into, a list of 10 items you must find in a GPU when that's not what you need. You really need to look at just a couple of things for what you're doing. And we're also going to go over some system requirement sheets again to kind of make a point, but that's what we got coming up here. So, all right, so moving on here, I'm going to make a statement right off that is essentially going to be debated among people, but it is easier to upgrade parts than it is to try to buy the max amount right away. What do I mean by that? So you can try to buy the top of the line GPU right now, waste a ton of money, and get something you may not even be touching. And that could have been money spent elsewhere on games or something else in the rig you've got. So you need to make sure that you're buying something that is going to be enough for what you're doing. Don't try to overbuy and future proof, right? I know it sounds silly considering I'm saying a 10, 15-year machine, but when I say 10 or 15-year machine, I mean a rig that is going to be compatible going forward so that you have room 10 to 15 years to upgrade what you're doing, right? But if you try to buy the top of the line card now, you're throwing a lot of money away. You're probably going to end up with something you're not using the performance out of. And especially for the build case here, since we're talking mainly 1080, 1440 gaming, you don't need a card that's going to push 4K. It's just not, it's going to be something you're wasting money on, specifically since a lot of those higher end cards are marketed towards a group of people that are willing to spend tons of money. Let's be realistic here. At this point in time, as I'm filming this video, your budget at a max should be $400-500. If you have the capability to spend $2,000-3,000 on a graphics card right now, you're watching the wrong series. Or maybe you're watching the right series and you want to know, whether you should be spending that much money or not. But $400-500 is the max you should be looking to spend on a graphics card. If you can do less, absolutely do less, and we'll go over that. The second one is something I'm tired of hearing, and a lot of channels do this, is the FPS per dollar measurement. to me, that's a waste of time and money, especially where we're at right now. It's just not a good metric. And I think it's a holdover of another thing I hate, which is cents per gigabyte. If you don't know what I mean, storage is still marketed in many articles as cents per gigabyte. That's an old metric from a time when storage was so expensive that mattered. I don't need to know, and really nor do you, how much change you're spending per gigabyte. Just tell me how much the 1 terabyte drive is. And that's how ridiculous it's got too. They're still using the, cents per gigabyte measurement for terabyte format, or not format, but terabyte size drives. And I hate that. It's ridiculous. It's akin to, a child that's older than 1 year still being called out by months. Just, it's something that needs to stop. So ignore FPS per dollar. Ignore dollar or change per gigabyte. Just they're useless metrics that do not matter anymore. Now that may change, that conversation may change if we get to a point where it's such a price comparison. But at the end of the day, if you're buying a 1 terabyte drive, and I'll probably bring this back up again in the video I do over storage, but if you're buying a 1 terabyte drive and the drive's $200 and there's another one that's, $150, I don't need somebody telling me how much per gigabyte it is and change. That makes no sense. Same with graphics cards. Please stop doing FPS. First of all, you should be really hyper focused on a target number for your FPS, right? Because there's a point where it doesn't matter anymore. And trying to convince someone that $2 per FPS, $1 per FPS, it makes for this better card, because that doesn't really fit for a number of reasons. There's other performance indicators on cards that are going to matter. And we're not going to go over this here because it really does not matter for the audience I have for this video. And if you're watching this and you are that audience member, those metrics do not matter at this time. Will they matter later on? A little bit, they will. But for where you're at, if you've never built a gaming rig before, we're just focused on getting you running, as I've stated from the beginning of the series. And I have a playlist set up for this, so if you haven't caught the beginning of this and you're just catching it now, go back. But 1080 gaming or 1440 gaming at 144 for competitive games, and for cinematic quality solo play games, 60 FPS, or 144 if you want. That's the range we're looking for here. And the reason for that is because it's a good starting point, it's a good way to get into gaming, and it's a good way to get yourself accustomed to things. It's also a much easier target to achieve when things are expensive. Beyond that, also, it lets you see what things are at 1080 and 1440, so you can then make the decision if you want to do 4K, or if you're starting at 1080, if you think that, 2K gaming is for you. A lot of people have not done 1080, besides a TV, have not done 1440, and look right at 4K and go, oh my God, it looks amazing. And it doesn't, because they have no baseline to look at. I've seen each of those resolutions, and I've stated this numerous times, not just here, but in videos I've done elsewhere, that I do not see the appeal of getting 4K because I'm not going to have a television large enough to take advantage of that resolution. I just don't. And 4K and the cost that comes with trying to run it for the prestige of having 4K is not worth it when 1080 is perfectly fine for multiple titles, for multiple games. Also, as I've stated, and this has been shown by numerous channels, numerous tech channels as well, competitive gamers do not run 4K. They're running 1080 and they're running at 144 in most cases. That's competitive gamers. So if you're one of those people that you are trying to emulate what competitive gaming is doing, or competitive gamers are doing in tournaments, 1080 144 is what the majority are doing. Are there some outliers? Absolutely, but that has been the standard for a while because it's easy to achieve, it's stable. It is a stable way to run things. When you start getting into 4K territory, frame gen, all that, you start having other issues. So that's just the brief of that. But, and again, to touch on this, for a lot of people, anything past 144 is useless. There have been tech channels that have been tests on this where they put people in front of gaming monitors, put them on different resolutions, and a lot of those people, when they tested, couldn't tell 200 FPS and above from 144. They just could not tell. Now, granted, you should test that out yourself and see what you're comfortable with. Personally, for me, and I've been playing games for a long time, for cinematic quality games, 60 FPS is the sweet spot on most. For solo play, cinematic games, that includes stuff like, even if it has a multiplayer component, it's not competitive. Like Monster Hunter World, I love playing that at 60 FPS. I think it looks really rich at that. The same way that most people like their movies at 25 FPS. I know that sounds ridiculous to a lot of people, but if you check what you're watching, you generally want to watch your movies at 25 FPS, sometimes 30s in there, depending. it gives it that rich film tone. Most people do not like watching their movies at 120 FPS or 120 hertz. And if you're wondering now, that's interchangeable. Hertz and FPS are the same thing. Those are interchangeable. So um, part of it is going to be a preference thing. And every time I do a video talking about FPS, I get a lot of people jumping at me that, well, oh, I do 200 FPS and I love it and it's great and I love it in 4K. But one, the video is not directed at those people, and two, those people have no idea what they're talking about. They literally don't. They have been duped by marketing, and they probably jumped right into a 4K setup and absolutely assume it's there. Now, I'm not saying there's no difference between the two. Obviously, if you're coming from 1080 at 60 FPS and you go to 4K at, 200 FPS, we'll put it there, you're going to see a difference, but it's mainly going to be the FPS, not so much the detail. 1080 can still hold detail. It still can. And I think that 1080 is overlooked far too often for a lot of its use. So, and again, I did a video about hardware. It was a shorter video, and I put it over on Facebook, and somebody came in and was like, well, developers, we love 4K. Great. I was doing a video talking about how 4K is useless for gaming, not really for developers. But that's the thing, is people have an opinion and they jump in on that. So anyway, yeah, it's one of those things where you've got to keep your expectations simple, try it out. And again, as I stated at the beginning, it is easier to upgrade than it is to just buy the top of the line and be stuck there. Now, if you have the money and you want to buy a monster card and you want to throw it in your system and run at 1080, be my guest. Absolutely. Like right now, the card I have can push 4K. I'm running at 1080 and I can run 1440 and all of that, but I'm sticking at 1080 for now. I've had a lovely experience with it. It has been great. Yes, there is the argument to be made that you're leaving some performance on the table because in 1080 you're kind of CPU bound. Yes and no. I'm not completely CPU bound. The GPU is being used. A lot of channels I've seen make it sound like that if you're not running above 1080, your card is just not being used at all. You're not doing any graphics processing. None of the effects work. That's not the case. Are you going to get more out of your GPU running on a 1440? Yes, but in the same hand, it's because you're pushing that card to run a higher resolution, so naturally it's going to use more of the card. Pardon me. But no, if you're hearing videos like that and you're thinking, oh, if I run at 1080, I'm just not going to use any of my GPU. I'm using only the CPU and nothing. That's not the case. I'm running competitive games and I'm running solo play games. Both are using the CPU and they're using the GPU. They're not using as much as the GPU as maybe they could, but I'm not losing anything. And my system isn't bottlenecked or capped out because I'm not running 1440 or higher. So don't let channels that express those things make you think that. You're not losing. You still have room left to do stuff. That also, if you think about it this way, if you're able to do 1080 now and you're using less than half the capability of your graphics card and you decide to stick with 1080, how much more life are you going to get out of a GPU? Right? Because a lot of people start having performance issues on 2K, 4K resolutions, and then they end up thinking, oh God, I need a graphics card, when in reality, it probably wasn't something with the graphics card. It's the way things are configured and they're not set up correctly. And we already touched on the monitor portion. A lot of people are not configured correctly. So if you have not watched that video, I urge you to go through the playlist, go watch the video I did about monitors, and make sure you're buying the right monitor. Really, if nothing else out of this series, you should be looking at each individual component you're going to buy and determine whether you're getting the right part or not. Because if you're not buying the right components and you're just throwing stuff together and you're building a machine, you're going to have problems. You're going to have problems. I think I may end up ending the series talking about why people have problems with gaming rigs, because I've seen video after video where somebody's like, hey, I got this machine, or a friend gave me a machine because he said he bought it new and he didn't like it. It was usually a pre-build. Some are, hey, I built this and I just don't like it. And it was a misconfigured system. And obviously when they try to get support on that, they're not going to get much help because the builder is going to be like, hey, it works fine. Or if they built it themselves, they're at a point where they can't return parts because there's nothing wrong with the parts. There's a lot in there. There's a lot more to that. So anyway, I think it's going to end this section and we're going to move on to the next portion of this, which is what to buy. And we'll look at that. So. All right, so now we're going to get you some graphics in here. We're going to go over a couple of system requirements sheets. I pulled these from the websites for the prospective publisher to give you an idea of what we're looking at here. But something I've said before, and this is very specific to PC gaming, is that developers want as many people as possible to play their games. So when they're developing the games, they look at the lowest system specs available and compatible with their game that will run it, and they make the minimum system requirements run that, but they also make the games compatible for the widest audience available. So this is why we still see games that are running on Windows 10, some that will even run on, you know, older versions of Windows or with less memory, less requirements and stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and run these in. Usually I overlay these after, but I want to kind of read them while we're running them. Some of these may be a little hard to see, but you can go to the manufacturer site and I'll go ahead and list the game. We're going to start out with a game. I keep throwing this one in here because I feel like part of the audience that will either build a rig, get a rig built for them, or want a gaming PC is going to be kids, right? Because there are titles out there for kids, and a lot of kids play games that aren't necessarily meant for them, but they're competitive. And so we're going to go with Fortnite because it is still widely popular. It may be losing numbers, but it's still popular. So if we look at Fortnite's spec sheet here, what you can see is that they have their recommended. Recommended is when the manufacturer says, hey, to run our game as we would like it to be played, here's what we recommend you should run this at. And for most, for the best experience, if you will. And so they do list a video card by name. You don't have to get those cards. Okay, you can go through and you can pick a card that matches the specs, but the minimum amount of VRAM, which VRAM is the memory on the graphics card that you need to play Fortnite, is 2 gigabytes. Now, I will tell you from experience, that's not going to be a lovely experience, but it will get you into the game playing. It will go a lot further if you're playing 1080. And then also, you're going to want to make sure that with that you're turning some of the settings down possibly. It really depends. You're going to have to play with the settings in there, but and then you see a Core i5. That's a fairly old processor they're recommending, so the processor specs aren't up there very high. And then see AMD Ryzen 3. That's a much older AMD processor. That's an AM3 socket. We're on AM4, AM5 socket right now. 16 gigs RAM, so RAM requirements a little bit higher than I would expect for it, and you can see they want you on an NVMe solid state. You do at this point. For how the game has changed, you're not going to be able to load that very fast. And then they're still running Windows 10, Windows 11. Minimum, though, you can see there, and we'll talk about the VRAM in a minute here, but the minimum, you know, is very low. These specs are very old. This Core i3, that's like a Windows 7 machine. That's very old. And then if you want Epic, they show you here. Now, we're going to pay attention to VRAM. I'm not going to tear into this one line by line, but VRAM's what we're paying attention to here. And they're saying 8 gigs VRAM for Epic quality preset specifications. That's like the max for Fortnite, right? So we have minimum is 2 gigs RAM, max is 8 gigs. And you're going to see a theme here as I go through these. Let's move on to Cyberpunk. So with Cyberpunk, they were nice enough to list resolutions. That's the other thing I kind of have a pet peeve with, is that a lot of these companies do not list the resolution they're recommending. They list the resolutions. So they're not even touching 1440 in here. You can see that line is not in there. But we see low and high settings on 1080. And even on 4K, 60 FPS is the max. So that kind of quashes the need for the higher FPS, considering the game was designed to run on 60 FPS. Then you get people trying to push the game at higher FPS and complain about performance. That's probably part of the reason why. But anyway, 1080 is a good place to start with this. I would try to run it on high. And let's look at how much VRAM you need. 6 or 8 gigs. And then you can see over here for the 4K, you need 12 gigs, but that's because we're running at the higher resolution mainly. And then, of course, RAM consumption goes up and stuff. I would rather play this game, which I still have yet to play. Again, that's the running joke of this whole thing. I built my rig to play Cyberpunk, and I have not played Cyberpunk. It's a lack of money issue is what it is. But anyway, 1080, 60 FPS, you know, Core i7 is what they're recommending. There are Ryzen 7. You know, this is not that hard to achieve, and it's not that expensive in hardware. Again, running theme here, 8 gigs VRAM, very accessible, and you'll see why that's important in a minute here. Let's move on to Battlefield 6. Battlefield 6, recommended system requirements. Now, they want you, we're going to kind of skip over these because you guys have seen the others. We're looking mainly at the VRAM. They want you to have 8 gigs VRAM for their recommended. The minimum is 6. So again, you see the theme here is 8 gigs VRAM. Let's move on to Call of Duty Modern Warfare. This one I had to zoom in and grab because I wanted to get as much as possible. I'm not really concerned with the ray trace. I don't care for ray tracing too much, but if you want to know what those specs are, it's there. That one is requiring 16 gigs RAM. Where's the video? They want the 2080 Super for that, but they're not really listing the video RAM you need. So you can go look the cards up. and this is what I mean, manufacturers don't always spell out what you need. I would guess you could probably get away with 8 gigs of VRAM, and that's not a problem considering they're seeing a GTX 670 or the GeForce 1650. I think you could get away with that. I wish they would have done a better job of explaining, how much VRAM they expect you to have. But the running theme here is most games will run on 8 gigs VRAM. Now, I've heard from people that you can't run anything less than 12. You need 16. Start with 8. Okay, start with 8 and run at 1080. I think what's happening is people are trying to run 4K games on 8 gigs VRAM and it's not working, and they're assuming you just can't play these games if you've only got 8 gigs of VRAM. That is not the case. Very much so, it's more what you're doing. Pay attention to what you're doing and build a system for that. If you think you absolutely need 4K, then you're going to have to spend a significantly larger amount of money. You're also going to get a lot less life out of your machine because as time goes by, you're not going to have anything to really upgrade too much, right? If you've already maxed your RAM and you're still trying to push 4K on games that aren't meant for 4K or aren't meant to run 4K at high FPS, then you're going to have problems. And I see a lot of it. And again, that's probably why I need to do a separate video talking about where people have problems with gaming PCs and PC gaming in general complain. It's because you got a lot of people that don't know what they're doing, trying to push machines to do things that aren't going to be able to produce the results they want. Does it mean you can't do it? No, but you need to have more knowledge about what you're doing. There's a lot more that needs to go into 4K gaming than just, I've got a card that does 4K. Why is my FPS garbage? Because something else is probably not configured right, or you don't have enough of what you need. Again, you can have a monster GPU, but if you underbought on your CPU so you could afford that GPU, you're probably going to have issues. But anyway, I don't want to jump down that rabbit hole right now. So this is where I talked about at the beginning of this video, some of the advice I'm going to give is probably not going to be applicable right now, but can in the future. So if you're looking at building a gaming rig and you're not doing it right now, but you may in the future, keep in mind that less VRAM can potentially mean a cheaper GPU. Right? Because obviously if you're buying an 8 gig card and then there's a 12 gig option and a 16 gig option, the more RAM they're adding out of the card, the more components they're adding, the more expensive it's going to get. That's just basic, economics of graphics cards and production and all that. What I found in hunting out right now is that there's not a very big gap between cards when it comes to putting the 12 gig card in there. I went through Amazon, I went through Best Buy, and I went through Newegg. And when I was looking at cards, there was a wide gap between 8 gig GPUs and 16 gig GPUs, but there was almost no gap when you put a 12 gig in there, right? So the cost that you would pay for a 12 gig GPU was not enough to justify getting it over getting the 8 gig or getting the 12 gig over the 16 gig, if that makes sense. And for these, I did my comparisons all on DDR6, GDDR6, because the GDDR7 equivalents were so expensive. And I don't think anybody needs to worry about getting GDDR7 right now. The card I'm running is GDDR6. I'm happy with it and I've been fine. So stick to that. If you can find it, cheaper, get it cheaper. But what was the price difference? I found about a $200 difference between an 8 gig card and a 16 gig card in most cases. And that price is probably going to fluctuate. So even if all you can get right now is an 8 gig card, that gets you in the door to play games. That gets you in there. As long as you stick to 1080, I would fully believe you could play any game that's out there as long as you're playing at 1080. And if it's cinematic at 60 FPS, if you're playing competitive, do 144 and stick with that. That is something that I would, be comfortable with. I do that personally on my machine, and that's where I'm at, and I have no problems. You're going to have to adjust some settings. I'd recommend you turn frame gen off where you can. Get as close to native resolution for the 1080 you can. A lot of games are turning frame gen on for 1080, even though you're running native 1080. So you have to look for those settings and adjust those out. Again, that's where you need a little more know-how. If a game's running real poopy, it's a good possibility it's trying to do frame generation when you don't need frame generation. If your machine can run 60 FPS natively at 1080, you don't need frame gen to be doing that for you. Same with competitive. If you can run 1080 with 144 FPS natively, you don't need frame gen jumping in there and doing stuff. It can make things worse. Fortnite, for example, when I was running that, it was running horribly. When I turned everything to native and made sure there was no frame gen going on, it was fine. And you may have to tweak some of those settings within your GPU control panel too. I had issues with that myself, but so that pretty much covers what to look for in a card, mainly, and I said I'm going to keep this simple. If you're just building and you're looking for advice, minimum of 8 gigabytes VRAM, so 8 gigs RAM on the video card itself, GDDR6 for the memory type. That'll be in plain characters on the front of any video card box you're looking at if you're in a store or if you're on a website. Those two should be very apparent. I would not worry exceptionally about clock speeds, because if you're getting a card from a reputable brand, it's going to run generally okay. Check the manufacture date. Make sure it's not like a 5-6-year-old card. You may want to get something a little bit newer if you can, just because the price on it. This is if you're buying new. We're going to talk about getting a used card here in a little bit. And, you should be fine doing that. Stick to name brands, XFX, AMD, MSI, cards like that. Stay away from weird Chinese brands you can't pronounce, right? Stay away from those. And you should be fine. So that's my advice for getting a card if you're buying new. A lot of that's going to stay the same if you're buying used. And we'll go over that, kind of a quick list of what to do and what not to do when buying a used GPU, which really kind of applies to any computer component. I think GPUs require a little more work, but we'll go over that. So anyway, that covers a section on what kind of card to get. It's very basic, real simple. I'm not overcomplicating this. That's really all you need to know. And that should get you going. One last little caveat is if the price is no difference and you can get if you're able to get a 16 gig and you find an 8 gigs the same price, go for the 16 gig card. When I bought my machine, that was the position I was in. When I bought the parts, I should say, from the machine, it was a point where the cards that had less VRAM were not available. 12 gig cards were unavailable because they'd been bought out, because that's where people were panic buying once supply started to tank. I built my machine in February, but I was ordering parts before February of 2026. And I think it's February, or was it last year? No, maybe it was last year. I forget now. Anyway, and then of course 8 gig cards were gone because that was the next cheapest option and people bought those out. So when it came time to buy a card, I spent about $400, still a good price at the time, even considering. And that is why I got the card I got. So that's where it's at. So anyway, I hope that helps there. And then we're going to move on to the next section here. Okay, so let's say you're at the point where you're building and you're able to afford all the other parts, you're able to get a processor, and now you're stuck at a point where you're just short the money. You have to have a GPU, or you really just don't have a machine. I mean, you can try if your processor supports, the GPU through the processor, but that's going to be a horrible experience. It's just going to be awful. You may have to look at buying a used card. And that's not as bad as it seems. I've had to do that before. You're going to have more luck getting 8 gig cards used than you will getting 12 or 16s, especially on price. They're still going to cost you, but you'll do a little bit better there. And if you're willing to take a bit of a chance, you can get a card that may be functional, but the fans aren't working. And I'll go over that in a minute. But first, what you should look for is go to a reputable market to get a GPU. Okay. eBay is a good source because they've got seller protections. You want a site with seller protections. Do not buy from third-party sites or aftermarket sites that do not have good seller protections, because you will end up getting screwed over on a card. It's going to happen, I can guarantee you. If you are a gambling type, you can try it on Craigslist. I don't recommend that either. One, it's going to be highly expensive. Same with Marketplace. Craigslist, Marketplace are the same thing when I'm talking about these. They don't have good seller protections, and you're going to end up getting a part, and you're probably never going to hear from that buyer again. And good luck getting any police involved, because it's just not a high enough dollar item they're going to want to get involved in. Cops probably end up laughing at you and telling you should have known better than buying stuff off of Marketplace or Craigslist, especially technology. So I would stick to Amazon, which has good seller protections. eBay has good seller protections. Sites like that. Okay. Even Newegg at this point sells used goods. I find their prices to be higher, and so ideally, if you're getting a used card, right, and you want to know what to look for, make sure the seller is telling you it's functional. I'm not buyer protections. I probably said seller protection too much, but make sure where you're buying cards from has good buyer protections. But look for a card that says it's functional. It's going to be hard to get video evidence of that. It's even if somebody had the card plugged in, I'm not going to believe it into a camera trick or something. You're going to have to take the listing at face value anyway. That's just how it works shopping online. But if they say the card is working, that's more so what matters, because if you have to open a dispute, you're going to want to use that, and make sure to screenshot where it says that in the listing. Get the listing ID, keep a copy of the listing, stuff like that. But generally, if they say, hey, it's in good working condition, some I see is they'll say it was used for a Bitcoining machine. Those are less likely now because that's kind of been away for a bit. Or they'll say, I just upgraded, I wanted to recoup some of my money. A lot of people are doing that. They're selling their cards off used to get newer ones. That's how they're coming up with the money. Look for those. And you can save yourself a significant amount of money. You may be able to find some 8 gig cards for under $200. That can be a huge savings on there. If you're buying it used and they say, the fans aren't working, it can be real cheap to get manufacturer fans through third-party sites or through the manufacturer. Sometimes writing an email, I had a GPU where the fans died on me, and I was able to get a hold of the manufacturer, and they sent me a set of fans for like $15. So that's something you can do. It's going to require a little bit of knowledge about pulling that card apart and then removing the old fans and putting the new ones in. I don't recommend re-oiling any of the fans. Just don't mess with that. Just replace the fans. It's not that complicated to do. Most are attached to a plastic shroud that you can move fairly easily. If you're not comfortable doing it, find someone who's technically inclined. They can help with that. At worst, you may have to spend a little bit of money, call for quotes to get a tech shop to repair the fans for you. If you have the fans, they may just put the fans in cheaply for you. So call around, find out. If you are buying a used card though, and it's, it looks dusty, or they say haven't used it in a while, or the fans aren't working, the other thing you're going to check, and this is where you need a professional help with, is make sure the thermal pads are good. You're going to make sure thermal pads are good. Heat transfer is going to be a huge issue. You want to make sure those thermal pads are in good condition. If you feel brave enough to open a card that you're taking a gamble on anyway, you may be able to see in there whether the pads look good or not. Just be very careful. You are going to want to do some basic maintenance, which is dusting the fins, the heatsink, dusting that out, blowing it out. An old tech trick is get a paintbrush. You can get a nylon paintbrush. Most of those are nylon fibers, and you can use that to dust your parts out. Really easy to do. Check the card as soon as you get it. Check that card, see if it works, make sure it works. You can generally throw a card you're getting for a newer machine into an older machine. Or maybe you have a friend that's, obviously if you're building for the first time, you're not going to have a machine. See if you got a friend that'll help you test that card out and see if it works. If not, and you've got the rest of your machine built, throw that card in, test it out, see if it works. Make sure to run something. This is where benchmarks come in handy. Make sure to run a stress test on that card and make sure it doesn't poop out at a lower temp. Make sure it can complete those tests fine. That's where benchmarks come in handy, is in troubleshooting. As I talked about in another video, benchmarks are not a competition. And I see far too many people running the numbers they're getting out like they've won a prize or they're winning a race. That's not what benchmarking's for. Use the benchmark to determine how well your machine is performing, is what you can do. And again, if you're not sure that works, there are a ton of videos that show you how to use like the Cinebench, stuff like that. There are a ton of videos that tell you what to look for when you're having issues, or if you've got a card that keeps just, the system shuts down because it's overheating. That can be multiple issues. So check that. The sooner you can test that, the better off you are. Most sites are going to give you 30 days to return a part. So make sure to clearly document, hey, card keeps overheating, fans are good, but it's failing during benchmarking. It fails when it's getting warm. That's going to be a reason to return the card, because it's going to be defective or not as advertised. They said it was working fine. So keep that in mind. That's about all there is to buying used, and that goes for about every part. If you get a processor and GPU, benchmark to make sure they're running. RAM is a little bit different. You can run mem tests and see if RAM's working, but I've seen cases where the mem test comes back clean, but there's something else going on. So again, you're going to want to do some testing. All in all, out of this, you should use this as a learning experience too. If you're switching to a gaming rig as your primary, you should be able to learn to troubleshoot those things as you can, because you're going to have issues. Something's going to happen. No matter how well built a system is, a part will fail. And the quicker you can figure out which part it is and why it's failed, the quicker you can repair it and get it replaced. For example, if your RAM fails, is it both sticks or one? Because it's cheaper to replace one stick. Is it the RAM or is it the DIMM slots it's in? Those are things to understand. And I may do another video later on after the series is over talking about just basic troubleshooting, why it's important. But a lot of machines now, I've been really happy with the built-in diagnostics that come with boards now. Considering I had a 12-year-old machine, the built-in diagnostics were not great. Even though it was a Dell, it was better than a lot of systems when that came out. It really was archaic in what it had. You got a lot of error codes and very cryptic information, and you could go search those, but it took a lot of work. I feel like machines now have a lot more that they're giving people in terms of what they're doing. So anyway, I hope that helps on the process of getting used components and kind of where to look. You know, that is something that is a viable option. If I had the money, I would definitely look into building a used machine. I've seen a lot of great channels on YouTube. I cannot remember the names right now. I do apologize. Where people go and they buy machines off Craigslist. These guys are techs though, so it's a little bit different. They buy machines off Craigslist that people say, hey, they're not working, and they get some good deals sometimes. Sometimes it's a GPU that's not seated correctly. Sometimes it's a processor that's overheating because they left the plastic on. You'd be surprised how many machines are built where people do not know what they're doing, and they end up selling them to flip them because they'd rather get some money because it's not being honored by the manufacturer, or too much time has passed. They just don't know what they're doing and the machine's perfectly fine. If I had the spare money, I'd be buying up machines like that, getting them working order, and either giving away or selling to people, because I feel like there's a lot of people who want to get into PC gaming that just don't know enough, and they end up going someplace else and wasting their money on other products that just do not suit them well. So that's where that's at. But yeah, it pretty much closes this out. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you want to know, or if you feel I've missed something, as usual, let me know in the comments and I'll be glad to cover it. But yeah, I think that covers the GPU section here. And yeah, the next video we're going to be moving on to looks like storage is what we're going to be talking about. And I'll be explaining my storage layout and why I think that's important, and kind of the strategy I go with. And we'll talk about how it's adaptable to even micro builds, so that you can kind of get yourself set up right so you're not overbuying on the wrong storage and not leaving a good storage medium out where you should be using that. So anyway, I hope that helps, guys, and I appreciate you guys sticking around watching this. And yeah, that's going to wrap it up for this video, guys.